All systems failing. We can't move. Communications are down.
We will not yield.
Space did not scream when it burned. It simply went dark, one star system at a time. 11 times before, it had gone exactly the same way. 11 worlds, 11 species, 11 corrections. Warn the target. Wait for surrender. If they refused, erase their fleet and take what was needed anyway. In 300 years, the pattern had never once failed. Before this one starts, if you're new to this channel, stay a while. This is where humanity keeps getting underestimated by things far older, far bigger, and far too sure of themselves, and where that certainty keeps costing them everything. If that sounds like your kind of story, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Now, back to Cathier Reach, because the Kesrath Suzerainty is about to make the same mistake for the 12th time. The Suzerainty had turned its eyes toward a small, quiet species called humanity. High Speaker Ordrun Vashe stood on the bridge of the Kesrath flagship Absolute Word, watching a hologram of a blue-green planet rotate slowly above the command table. Earth, a backwater world barely 2 centuries into real space travel. Weak shields, small fleets, no known allies among the greater galactic powers. They have one border system we want, Vashe said, addressing his war council. Cathier Reach, rich in rare minerals, perfect for our next shipyard expansion. An officer beside him, Commander Yeshel, nodded. Scans confirm minimal military presence in the sector. Humanity has spread thin. They colonized fast but built slow. Then this will be simple, Vashe said. We do what we always do. We offer them a choice. Give us the system or we take it by force, and they lose far more than one system. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. This was routine. In 300 years, no species had refused the Suzerainty's ultimatum and survived intact. Most species surrendered outright. A few tried to fight, lost badly, and then surrendered anyway, only worse off. Yeshel tilted her head slightly. Do we know anything about their military doctrine, High Speaker? Their history? Vashe waved a clawed hand dismissively. Humans are known for one thing above all else: talking. They negotiate everything. Trade disputes, land disputes, even their own wars end in long tables full of signed papers. Our analysts studied 500 years of their communications. They fight only when cornered, and even then they try to find a way out through words first. So they will negotiate, Yeshel said. They always negotiate, Vashe replied, almost bored. Send the ultimatum. Full coalition escort for the meeting, the 3C fleet, the Droz carriers, and the Ilvex mercenary contracts. Let them see exactly what refusing us would cost. 3 days later, deep in a neutral system called Vantral's Edge, the coalition fleet arrived. It was an impressive sight meant to be. Over 200 warships spread across the dark like a wall of metal and light. Kesrath Suzerainty cruisers with long spinal cannons. Droz battle carriers bristling with drone bays. Ilvex raiders, fast and cruel-looking, built for one purpose only. At the center of it all sat a single neutral station, built specifically for moments like this. Negotiation stations used by a dozen powers over the centuries to settle disputes without full war. Its systems were monitored by an independent council meant to guarantee fairness. In truth, everyone knew fairness rarely mattered when one side brought 200 ships and the other brought none. On the station's observation deck, Vashe watched the sensor logs update. Confirmation of human transponder and officer reported. One vessel entering the system, no escort detected. Vashe's mandibles clicked in something like amusement. One ship. Of course, they send a diplomat alone, unarmed, expecting words to save them. Ship classification pending, the officer added. Signature does not match any registered human vessel class in our archive. Vashe barely looked up. It doesn't matter what kind of ship it is. It's one ship. Aboard that single vessel, things were far quieter than anyone watching from the coalition fleet might expect. Ambassador Dana Whitmore sat in a small briefing room near the ship's forward section, reviewing notes on a translucent screen. She was 51 years old, silver, starting to show at her temples, dressed in a simple dark blue uniform with no rank insignia, beyond a small pin shaped like an olive branch wrapped around a closed fist. It was the mark of Earth's diplomatic corps, a symbol chosen carefully generations ago to remind everyone, including humans themselves, that peace and strength were not opposites. Across from her sat Captain Elena Cortez, commanding officer of the vessel carrying them both. Cortez was younger, mid-30s, with the calm, still expression of someone who had trained her whole life not to show what she was thinking. "They'll expect us to be afraid," Whitmore said, not looking up from her notes. "They'll get exactly what they expect, foe." "Are the first 10 minutes," Cortez replied. "After that, I doubt it." Whitmore allowed herself the smallest smile. "You've read the intelligence reports. The threat Kesrath Suzerainty has never lost one of these negotiations. 200 worlds have surrendered territory rather than test them. 200 worlds weren't us," Cortez said simply. There was no arrogance in her voice, just fact, stated plainly, the way a person might mention the weather. Whitmore set down her notes. "You understand what happens if this goes wrong. If they see it before we're ready to show them, or if they strike first without warning, they won't." Rahia said the Kesrath Suzerainty always follows their own ritual. Ultimatum, meeting, refusal, response. They've done it the same way for 300 years because it's always worked. Predictable enemies are the easiest kind. Whitmore studied her captain for a long moment. Command really believes this is the right approach. One ship, no fleet standing by, everything resting on a single first impression. Command believes, Raya said, that showing up with 100 warships would only convince them we were scared enough to bring 100 warships. This way they don't get to measure us by numbers they already understand. They have to measure us by something they've never seen before. Whitmore exhaled slowly and looked toward the small viewport where the distant glittering wall of the coalition fleet was just becoming visible. "Let's hope they're patient enough to actually look," she said. The meeting was set for the station's central chamber, a wide circular room with a table built to accommodate a dozen different physiologies at once. Vashe arrived early, flanked by 2 junior officers and Commander Yeshel, who had insisted on attending personally. "Why do you care so much about this one?" Vashe asked her as they walked in. "Curiosity," Yeshel admitted. 200 years I've studied human records. I want to see how the last thread of history plays out." Vashe snorted. "There's no thread left to play. There's only the ending. They see our fleet, they hear our demand, they sign the transfer, and we all go home rich." The human delegation arrived exactly on time, not a second early, not a second late, a detail that did not go unnoticed by the more observant members of the coalition. Ambassador Whitmore walked in first, Captain Cortez half a step behind her, and no one else. No guards, no advisors, no visible weapons. Vashe rose slightly from his seat, a gesture of practiced hollow respect. "Ambassador, welcome. I trust your journey was without incident." "It was," Whitmore said, taking her seat. "Your fleet made for quite a view on approach." 212 vessels, Vashe said, letting the number hang in the air deliberately. "A demonstration of the seriousness of this matter, nothing more." "Understood," Whitmore said, her tone even. Yeshel, watching closely, noted something odd already. Most species faced with that number for the first time showed some sign, a change in breathing, in posture, in the small tells that came before real fear. The ambassador showed none of it. Neither did the captain beside her. Vashe continued, moving quickly into the ultimatum, as he had done 11 times before. "The Cathia Reach system, currently claimed by Earth's outer colonies, has been designated for Kesrath Suzerainty development. You will formally cede the system, its resources, and its colonies within 72 hours. In exchange, the Kesrath Suzerainty guarantees the safety of your remaining territories and offers a trade relationship befitting a cooperative species." He paused, as species usually asked questions here, tried to bargain, tried to find a smaller loss to accept. Whitmore said nothing for a moment. Then, "And if we decline," Vashe's mandibles clicked again, this time with less amusement and more impatience. "Then, the fleet currently surrounding this station will proceed to Cathia Reach and take by force what you would not give freely. Your colonies there will be evacuated under duress, if they are fortunate enough to be evacuated at all. I would encourage you not to test the alternative, Ambassador. 200 worlds have made that mistake before you. None repeated it twice. Whitmore glanced briefly at Cortez. Some unspoken message passed between them, small and quick. We appreciate the offer, Whitmore said finally, and the honesty behind it. Earth does not intend to cede the Cathia Reach system. Silence spread through the chamber. Yeshel leaned forward slightly. You refuse. We refuse the terms as stated, Whitmore said. We are, however, prepared to discuss alternative arrangements, trade agreements, resource sharing, mutual development contracts. Earth has never been opposed to cooperation. High Speaker, we are opposed to threats. Vashe's patience thinned visibly. You have one ship, Ambassador. One. My fleet could reduce this station and everything near it to debris before your vessel completed a single evasive maneuver. You could try, Cortez said quietly. It was the first tee. She had spoken. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Captain Vashe said slowly, testing the word like it tasted strange. Do you understand the numbers you are facing? I do, Cortez said. 212 ships, 3 sea-heavy cruisers, Droz carriers, roughly 40 Ilvex raiders on contract. I've had the specifications for 6 hours. Vashe stared at her. And you are not concerned. I didn't say that, Cortez replied. I said you could try. The words hung in the air, simple and calm, carrying no bravado, no anger, just a quiet certainty that unsettled the room far more than shouting ever could have. Yeshel found herself studying Cortez closely now, the way one studies a puzzle that suddenly feels far more complicated than it first appeared. There was no fear in the human captain's face. Not hidden fear, not controlled fear, none at all. Vashe recovered his composure and turned back to Whitmore. This posturing changes nothing. You have one ship, we have 200. The mathematics of this negotiation are not complicated. No, Whitmore agreed. They're not. She reached into a small case beside her chair and withdrew a data chip, sliding it across the table toward Vashe. What is this? He asked, not touching it. A formal record, Whitmore said. For your archives, and for the archives of every power watching this meeting through the station's independent monitoring systems. It states plainly that Earth was given an ultimatum backed by overwhelming force, and that Earth declined to surrender territory under threat. Whatever happens next, the record will show it was your fleet that chose the next move. Vashe's officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how the ritual went. There should have been fear here, or desperate bargaining, or at the very least some visible sign of the weight of the moment. Instead, there was only this strange, steady calm, like two people discussing terms they already knew the outcome of. You are making a mistake, Ambassador, Vashe said, his voice lower now. Perhaps, Whitmore said, rising from her seat, Cortez rising beside her, but it is ours to make. As they turned to leave, Yeshel spoke up, unable to stop herself. Why send one ship? If you believed refusal was truly wise, why not bring your fleet to at least make a show of resistance? Whitmore paused at the doorway and looked back. Because it wouldn't have mattered, she said simply. Not the way you think. Then she and Cortez left the chamber, walking calmly back toward the docking bay, back toward the single vessel waiting quietly in the dark beyond the station. A ship the coalition sensors still could not properly classify. A ship whose true name and true purpose had not yet been spoken aloud in that room. Vashe watched them go, and for the first time in 300 years of Kesrath Suzerainty history, something small and cold moved through his chest. Not fear exactly. Not yet. Just the first faint edge of doubt. Recall the fleet to formation, he said finally, his voice tight. Prepare strike vectors toward Cathia Reach. If they will not yield the system willingly, we will take it, and we will make certain the cost of their refusal is remembered by every species watching. Yeshel hesitated before relaying the order. Something about the way the human captain had said you could try stayed with her, quiet and unshaken all the way back to her station. Far across the system, aboard the human vessel, now beginning its slow, unhurried departure from the negotiation station, Captain Cortez sat back in her chair and allowed herself, finally, a small breath of relief. "They took the bait," she said. Ambassador Whitmore nodded, watching the coalition fleet on the display, its formation already shifting, already preparing for what it believed would be an easy, one-sided response. "Now," Whitmore said quietly, "let's see if they're ready for what's actually coming." Behind them, deep within the ship's core, something vast and patient began, for the first time to fully wake. The Kesrath Suzerainty War Council reconvened aboard the Absolute Word 4 hours after the failed negotiation, and the mood in the room had changed completely. High Speaker Ordrun Vashe stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, staring at the tactical display floating above it. 212 ships arranged in their standard advance formation, ready to move on Cathia Reach, and a single blinking marker at the edge of the display representing the human vessel that had, against every rule of the ritual, refused to surrender. "Sensor analysis," Vashe said. Commander Yeshill stepped forward, her claws tapping quickly across the display controls. A rotating image of the human ship appeared, translucent blue lines mapping its hull. "This is the problem, High Speaker," she said. "We cannot classify it." Vashe's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Its hull length is approximately 1.4 kilometers, larger than a 3C heavy cruiser, smaller than a Droz carrier. That part is simple. What is not simple is everything else." Yeshill pulled up a secondar. "Y display filled with data streams and error messages. Our sensors read 17 distinct energy signatures from different points along the hull, none of which match any known drive system in our archives. Its hull material does not match any known alloy composition. And most concerning of all," she paused. "Continue," Vashe said, his patience thin. "We cannot get an accurate weapons count," Yeshill admitted. "Every scan returns a different number. Sometimes 12, sometimes 40. Once, briefly, our systems reported over 200 distinct weapon signatures before the reading corrected itself. Our analysts believe this may be some form of sensor deception technology, something designed specifically to prevent accurate readings." A murmur spread through the room. Sensor deception at this level was not unheard of, but it required extraordinary engineering, the kind only the oldest and most advanced powers in the galaxy possessed. Not something a species like humanity, barely 2 centuries into real spaceflight, should have been capable of building. "Human technological development has been tracked for over 100 years, Vashe said slowly. "Our own analysts confirmed as recently as last month that Earth's most advanced warships carry perhaps 20 weapon emplacements at most, similar in output to our own mid-tier cruisers. This is not possible, and yet," Yeshill said, gesturing at the display, "there it is." Vashe stared at the ship's marker for a long moment. Then he straightened. "It doesn't matter. One ship, regardless of what tricks it carries, cannot stand against 212. Proceed with the operation as planned. Full fleet advance to Cathia Reach. If the human vessel attempts to interfere, destroy it first, then proceed with the system's occupation. Understood, High Speaker." As the officers dispersed to their stations, Yeshill lingered a moment longer, looking at the strange, shifting readings on the display. Something about the ship bothered her in a way she couldn't quite name. It wasn't the size, or the mystery weapons, or even the strange hull material. It was the way it sat there, not hiding, not fleeing, just waiting. Yeshill had requested, and unusually been granted, a place aboard a liaison shuttle sent to formally observe the human vessel before the fleet's advance, a ceremonial courtesy no one expected to matter. She had not expected to actually board the ship. But when the shuttle reached the designated coordinates, a short-range transmission came through, calm and unbothered, from Captain Cortez herself. "You're cleared to dock, Commander." Ambassador Whitmore extends the invitation personally, if you'd like to see for yourself what you're negotiating against. Yeshill's pilot looked back at her, uncertain. Yeshill considered it only briefly before nodding. "Take us in." The docking process was smooth, efficient, disturbingly quiet. No alarms, no visible tension among the crew that greeted her. A young human officer, introduced simply as Lieutenant Equium, led her through corridors toward what he called the observation gallery. Yeshil had expected the cramped, utilitarian feel of a warship at war, crew moving with tense urgency. Instead, the corridors were wide, quiet, softly lit, and the crew who passed her moved with an unhurried precision, nodding politely, none of them showing the faintest sign that a Kesrath officer was walking freely through their ship during the opening hours of a war. "You're not concerned about security," Yeshil said, mostly to herself. Equium glanced back, a small, polite smile on his face. "Should we be? I could be gathering intelligence." "You could," Equium agreed easily. "Won't matter much, though." Yeshil wanted to press the point, but something in his tone told her it wasn't worth the effort. He wasn't being arrogant. He said it the way someone might mention that rain wouldn't matter because the roof didn't leak. They reached the observation gallery, a long chamber with a wide viewport looking out over the ship's forward hull. Yeshil stepped closer to the glass and felt something in her chest tighten. From here, close and unfiltered by sensor interference, she could finally see it properly. The hull was covered in long geometric ridges, unlike anything in Kesrath Suzerainty or Dro's shipbuilding traditions. Sections of the plating shimmered faintly, shifting color in a way that made her eyes ache slightly if she looked too long. And along the ship's flank, at regular intervals, she could see openings, dozens of them, far more than any reasonable weapons loadout should require, though many of them showed no visible weapon systems inside, just darkness. "What are those?" she asked, pointing. Ambassador Whitmore's voice answered from behind her. "Depends which ones you're asking about." Yeshil turned. Whitmore had entered quietly, Captain Cortez beside her, both moving with the same unhurried calm as everyone else aboard. "Some of them are exactly what they look like," Whitmore continued, coming to stand beside. Yeshil at the viewport. "Weapon housings. Others are decoys, built to look identical from the outside, carrying nothing at all. Your sensors can't tell the difference, and neither can most others who have tried." "Why?" Yeshil asked. "What purpose does that serve beyond confusion?" "Confusion is the purpose," Cortez said simply. "An enemy who doesn't know what they're facing hesitates. Hesitation costs seconds. Seconds matter." Yeshil studied the ship a moment longer before turning to face them directly. "Your High Speaker, forgive me, your ambassador believes this ship can stand against 212 vessels. I have studied naval doctrine for most of my adult life. No single ship, regardless of its design, survives those numbers. It is not possible mathematically." Whitmore didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to the viewport, watching the stars. "Commander," she said finally, "can I ask you something?" Yeshil hesitated, then nodded. "In 300 years, has the Kesrath Suzerainty ever fought a war it didn't already know it would win?" Yeshil opened her mouth, then closed it. She thought of the archives, the long list of corrections, each one a calculated certainty before the first shot was ever fired. "No," she admitted. "Every campaign is modeled extensively beforehand. We do not commit to conflicts we might lose." "That's smart," Whitmore said. "It's also a weakness, though most people who rely on certainty never realize it's a weakness until it's too late." "Meaning what exactly?" Cortez answered this time. "Meaning your entire military doctrine is built around fighting enemies you can measure. Enemy fleet size, enemy weapon output, enemy technology level. You plug in the numbers and the numbers tell you whether you win. It's worked for 300 years because every enemy you face could be measured." She nodded toward the viewport, toward the ship's strange shifting hull. "We can't be." Yeshil felt something cold settle in her stomach, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Not since she was a young cadet, staring at simulations of wars long since won, wondering what it might have felt like to face an enemy whose outcome wasn't already decided. "Why show me this?" she asked quietly. "Why let me see any of it?" Whitmore turned to face her fully now, and for the first time, something in her expression softened just slightly. "Because in a few hours, a lot of people are going to die who don't need to," she said. and I would rather one person on that fleet understand why than have 212 ships find out the hard way, all at once. You're trying to warn me, Yeshel said slowly. To warn the Kesrath Suzerainty through me. I'm trying to give you a chance to stop this before it happens, Whitmore said. Your High Speaker won't listen to me. He's already decided how this ends, but you asked questions today that he didn't. That matters. Yeshel looked back out at the stars, at the distant glimmer of the Kesrath Suzerainty fleet assembling for its advance toward Kathir Reach, and for the first time in her long career, she felt genuinely, deeply uncertain. What is this ship? She asked finally, her voice quiet. Truly. Not the decoys, not the mystery. What is it actually built to do? Captain Cortez was the one who answered, her voice calm and even, carrying no pride, no threat, just simple fact. It's not built to fight a fleet, Commander, she said. It's built to end a war before it really starts. There's a difference, and your High Speaker is about to learn it. Yeshel returned to the absolute word 40 minutes later, her mind heavy with everything she had seen. She found High Speaker Vashe on the bridge, already deep into final preparations for the fleet's advance. Commander, he said without looking up. Your report. Yeshel hesitated. She thought of the strange hull, the calm crew, the quiet certainty in Ambassador Whitmore's voice. She thought of Captain Cortez's simple words. It's built to end a war before it really starts. High Speaker, she said carefully, I would recommend delaying the advance at minimum until we better understand. Denied, Vashe said flatly, cutting her off. We have delayed enough. The fleet moves within the hour. This ship, whatever tricks it carries, is one vessel. Our doctrine has never failed against these odds, and it will not fail today. Yeshel wanted to argue further, wanted to explain what she had felt aboard that strange, quiet ship, the certainty in its crew's eyes that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with knowledge Yeshel simply didn't have. But she had served under Vashe long enough to know when a decision was no longer open to discussion. Understood, High Speaker, she said instead. As she turned back to her station, she glanced once more at the tactical display, at the single blinking marker representing the human vessel, sitting quietly at the edge of the system, patient and unmoving, waiting for a fleet of 212 ships to make the first move. It's not built to fight a fleet, it's built to end a war before it really starts. The words echoed in her mind as the order came down the line. Ship by ship, section by section, all vessels prepare for advance. Formation, target Kathir Reach. 212 engines flared to life across the dark. The largest coalition fleet assembled in over a decade, beginning its slow, confident march toward a system it fully expected to claim without real resistance. Behind them, unmoving, the persistent reckoning watched them go. And deep within its hull, systems that had remained dormant for over a decade, since the day the ship was first quietly commissioned, built for exactly this moment and no other, began, finally, to fully activate. The Kesrath Suzerainty fleet moved through open space in perfect formation, 212 ships arranged like a slow-moving wall of steel and light. From the bridge of the absolute word, High Speaker Vashe watched the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of a man who had done this many times before. Time to Kathir Reach, he asked. 18 minutes, High Speaker, an officer replied. And the human vessel, Commander Yeshel checked her display. Holding position. It has not moved since our advance began. Vashe allowed himself a small, satisfied sound. As expected. It cannot stop 212 ships, so it does nothing at all. A wise choice, if a late one. But Yeshel kept watching the marker on her screen, and something about its stillness unsettled her more than movement would have. She thought of the words Captain Cortez had spoken aboard that strange, quiet ship. It's not built to fight a fleet. It's built to end a war before it really starts. High Speaker, she said carefully. Incoming transmission. Human vessel, direct channel, addressed to the fleet command. Vashe's mandibles clicked with irritation. Another attempt at negotiation. Predictable. Put it through. Let us hear their final plea before we finish this. The main display shifted, and Ambassador Whitmore's calm face appeared, Captain Cortez seated beside her, both as composed as they had been during the failed meeting hours earlier. High Speaker Vashe, Whitmore said. I'll keep this brief since I understand you're on a schedule. You have 30 seconds, Ambassador, before I lose interest entirely, Vashe said. Are you prepared to reconsider Earth's position? No, Whitmore said simply. I'm prepared to give you one final opportunity to reconsider yours. A ripple of quiet, disbelieving laughter passed through several officers on the bridge. Vashe raised a hand, silencing them, though a faint smile touched his own expression. You have 212 ships passing through your borders in the next 18 minutes, Ambassador, on their way to claim territory you have refused to surrender. I fail to see what position I have left to reconsider. Then let me show you, Whitmore said. The display split. On one side, the coalition fleet's own formation, exactly as their sensors tracked it. On the other, a projection, not from Kesrath Suzerainty systems, but transmitted directly from the human vessel, showing the same formation overlaid now with a series of soft red markers, dozens of them, scattered precisely across specific ships throughout the fleet. What is this? Vashe demanded. A simulation, Whitmore said, of what happens in the next 90 seconds if this exchange ends in hostilities. I want to be very clear, High Speaker. This is not a threat. It's a demonstration. There's a difference, and I'd like you to understand it before you make your next decision. Yeshel leaned forward at her station, staring at the red markers. They weren't randomly placed. Each one sat precisely over engine sections, weapon arrays, communication relays, critical systems chosen with obvious practiced precision. 90 seconds, Cortez said, speaking for the first time, her voice calm and even as it had been in the negotiation chamber. That's how long it would take to remove the offensive capability of your entire fleet. Not destroy it. Remove its capability to fight. Every ship marked would lose engines, weapons, or communications, in that order, without loss of life beyond what's structurally unavoidable. You expect me to believe one ship can accomplish this against 212 vessels, Vashe said, his voice tightening despite his attempt to sound unbothered. I don't expect you to believe it, Whitmore said. I expect you to test it because that's what your doctrine tells you to do when faced with an unverified threat. That's fine. That's your right. I only ask that you understand clearly that what happens next was not started by us. The transmission ended. Silence held the bridge of the absolute word for a long moment. Then Vashe laughed. Short, sharp, genuine bluster. Elaborate, well-produced bluster, but bluster all the same. No single vessel carries the firepower to threaten 212 ships simultaneously, let alone with the precision described. This is a trick meant to delay us. Nothing more. High Speaker Yeshel said carefully, He sensor anomalies we discussed earlier. Our sensor tricks, Commander, as I said before, Vashe snapped. I grow tired of this hesitation. Continue the advance. Full speed to Kathir Reach. And the human vessel, an officer asked. Vashe considered this for only a moment. If it attempts to interfere with our advance in any way, destroy it immediately. I will not have some overproduced light show delay a campaign 300 years in the making. Aboard the persistent reckoning, Captain Cortez watched the coalition fleet formation continue forward on her own display, unchanged, undeterred. They're not slowing down, said Lieutenant Equum from his station. I didn't expect them to, Cortez said. Vashe built his entire career on this doctrine, working exactly the way it's worked for 300 years. He can't back down now. Not publicly, not with his own war council watching. Ambassador Whitmore, seated nearby, studied the same display with a more troubled expression. I gave them a real chance. You did, Cortez agreed. More of one than most captains would have. That's not on you, Ambassador, that's on him. How long until they're in engagement range? Cortez checked her own instruments. 12 minutes, give or take. Whitmore exhaled slowly. Then let's make sure the record is very, very clear about who chose this. It already is, Cortez said. Full transmission logs, time-stamped, broadcast openly to every independent monitoring station in the sector the moment we sent that warning. Whatever happens next, no one credible will be able to say we didn't try. Whitmore nodded, though the weight in her chest didn't lift. She had spent 30 years in the diplomatic corps, believing fundamentally that most conflicts could be avoided if both sides simply understood each other clearly enough. Today had tested that belief more than she cared to admit. "Captain," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Go ahead. 90 seconds, no wasted shots, no unnecessary casualties. Is that actually possible, or was that number chosen because it sounded reassuring on a transmission?" Cortez was quiet for a moment, her eyes still on the approaching fleet. "It's possible," she said finally. "It's been tested, simulated, refined for years. But possible isn't the same as easy, Ambassador. 90 seconds against 212 ships with precision targeting on every single vessel, no wasted shots, minimal loss of life." She paused. "It's the hardest thing this ship was ever built to do. Harder than fighting and even battle would be. Honestly, anyone can destroy. Restraint at this scale, under fire at speed, that takes something else." "Then why do it that way?" Whitmore asked. "Why not simply?" "Because who we are matters," Cortez said, cutting her off gently. "Not just to them, to us. If Earth's answer to threats is always the fastest, most brutal solution available, then eventually that's all we'll know how to be. This ship wasn't built to make war easier, Ambassador. It was built to make it survivable for everyone, including the people who started it, without ever pretending we weren't strong enough to end it another way." Whitmore looked at her captain for a long moment, understanding for the first time the deeper weight behind the ship's quiet, patient design. 10 minutes to engagement range, came a call from the tactical station. Cortez nodded, rising from her seat, her expression settling into the same calm, focused stillness that had unsettled Commander Yeshel hours earlier. "Bring the ship to full readiness," she said quietly. "No visible changes to our formation, no aggressive posturing. Let them come to us exactly as they planned." "Aye, Captain." Back aboard the Absolute Word, the fleet continued its advance, the human vessel's warning already fading into background noise among Vashe's officers, most of whom had returned to the same confident chatter that had defined the bridge before the transmission. Only Commander Yeshel remained quiet, watching the human ship's marker on her display, remembering the strange shifting hull she had seen up close only hours earlier, remembering Ambassador Whitmore's words. "I would rather one person on that fleet understand why than have 212 ships find out the hard way together, all at once." "Commander," Vashe said, noticing her silence. "You seem troubled." "High Speaker," Yeshel said carefully. "May I make one final recommendation before we reach engagement range?" Vashe sighed but gestured for her to continue. "Signal the fleet to hold at the system's outer edge. Not surrender, not retreat, simply hold. Give the human vessel no justification to act, and give us time to properly assess the threat before committing the full fleet to close engagement range." Vashe studied her for a long moment, and for just a fraction of a second, something like genuine consideration passed behind his eyes. Then it was gone. 300 years, Commander," he said. 300 years of this exact doctrine unbroken. I will not Alt in advance 18 minutes from completion because one ship sent us a well-produced light show. Maintain course. Full advance." Yeshel said nothing more. She simply turned back to her station, watching the numbers on her display tick steadily downward, the distance between 212 confident warships and a single patient vessel that had warned them clearly and honestly exactly what was coming. 6 minutes to engagement range. 5, 4. On the bridge of the persistent reckoning, Captain Cortez stood at the center of her own crew, calm, steady, her eyes fixed on the same closing distance. "All stations report ready, Captain," Equium said quietly. Cortez nodded once. "Then let's show them the difference," she said, "between a warning and a threat." The countdown continued, second by second, toward a moment 300 years of unbroken Kesrath Suzerainty doctrine had never once prepared them for. The distance between the two fleets closed to zero in silence. No dramatic countdown blared across the Absolute Word's bridge. No alarms. Just a single soft chime as the tactical officer confirmed engagement range had been reached, and High Speaker Vashe gave the order he had given 11 times before in 11 different systems, against 11 different species who had all eventually learned the same lesson. Fleet, weapons free, Vashe said. Target the human vessel. All batteries. 212 ships began charging their weapons at once, a wave of gathering energy that lit up sensor readings across the system like a rising tide. Aboard the persistent reckoning, Captain Elena Cortez watched the same readings on her own display, her expression unchanged, her voice level. "They've committed," she said quietly. "All stations execute." What happened in the next 90 seconds would be studied, argued over, and retold across a dozen species' histories for generations to come. But for those who lived through it aboard either fleet, it did not feel like 90 seconds. It felt like something outside of time entirely, fast beyond comprehension, and yet somehow perfectly clear. The persistent reckoning did not maneuver. It did not attempt to dodge the first wave of incoming fire, did not retreat, did not do anything a normal warship facing impossible odds might reasonably do. Instead, its hull, the strange shifting hull that had confounded Kesrath Suzerainty sensors for hours, opened along dozens of those mysterious housings Commander Yeshel had noticed from the observation gallery. Not all of them, just enough. The first wave of Kesrath Suzerainty cannon fire struck a shimmering field several kilometers ahead of the ship's hull and simply stopped, absorbed into something Kesrath Suzerainty sensors couldn't properly identify, even as it happened directly in front of them. Then the persistent reckoning answered. Precise, narrow beams of focused energy lanced out from the ship in every direction at once, not as a single overwhelming blast, but as hundreds of individually targeted strikes, each one aimed with impossible precision at a specific point on a specific vessel. On the Absolute Words Bridge, alarms began sounding across every station simultaneously. Engine Section 3 disabled, weapons array offline, shipwide power fluctuation, comm relay down across 40% of the fleet. Vashe stood frozen for a moment, staring at the tactical display as marker after marker across his formation flickered from green to yellow to red. Not destroyed, not gone, but suddenly, unmistakably, unable to fight. "That's not possible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Yeshel, at her station, watched the pattern unfold with a mixture of horror and something close to awe. Every strike matched almost exactly the red markers Ambassador Whitmore had shown them less than 20 minutes earlier. Engines first, then weapons, then communications. Ship after ship across the entire 212 vessel formation, going dark in precisely the order they had been warned about. Casualties, Vashe demanded, some part of him still needing this to be the beginning of a massacre he could at least understand. Minimal, High Speaker, an officer reported, disbelief plain in his voice. Most affected vessels report structural damage only to targeted systems. Crew casualties across the fleet are, he checked his readout again, as if unable to trust the number, under 200 fleet-wide, most from secondary system failures, not direct strikes. 200 casualties, across a fleet of over 200,000 crew members, engaged in what should have been a one-sided slaughter in the Suzerainty's favor. Vashe sat down heavily in his command chair, staring at the display, at the wreckage of 300 years of unbroken certainty unfolding in real time in front of him. Aboard the Ilvex Nightblade, one of the mercenary raiders contracted to the Coalition fleet, Captain Raz Dorvan watched his own weapons array flicker and die in the middle of a targeting lock he never got to complete. "Report," he barked. "Weapons offline, Captain. Engines at 40%. We're..." His weapons officer paused, staring at his display. "Captain, we're still alive, fully crewed, just disabled." Raz Dorvan stared out the viewport at the distant, glowing shape of the human vessel, still holding its position exactly where it had been 90 seconds earlier, as if it had never moved at all. He had fought in over 30 engagements across his career as a mercenary captain. He had seen fleets annihilated, boarded, gutted from the inside. He had never, not once, seen an enemy capable of stopping his ship without killing a single member of his crew. They could have killed us, he said slowly, understanding dawning with a chill he hadn't felt in years. They could have killed all of us, and they chose not to. On the absolute word, the war hawks among Vashe's own war council were not so easily humbled. High Speaker, barked General Threen, commander of the Suzerainty's ground assault forces still aboard for the anticipated occupation of Kathir Reach. This is a temporary setback, nothing more. Our secondary weapons batteries remain functional across at least 60 vessels. Order a concentrated strike on the human ship directly. It cannot maintain that level of output indefinitely. Vashe hesitated, staring at the display, at the strange stillness of the human vessel sitting untouched in the middle of a fleet it had just crippled without significant loss of life on either side. High Speaker, Threen pressed. If we do not act now, every species watching this engagement will believe the Kesrath Suzerainty can be humbled by a single ship. Our reputation, our entire doctrine, depends on responding with overwhelming force. Now. Something in Vashe's chest, pride, fear, 300 years of institutional certainty, pushed him toward agreement. Concentrate all remaining functional weapons on the human vessel, Vashe said, his voice tight. Fire at will. Commander Yeshul turned sharply toward him. High Speaker, they demonstrated restraint. They showed us exactly what they were capable of and chose not to use it fully. If we strike again, we test the limits of that restraint. Commander, Vashe snapped. Execute the order. Aboard the persistent reckoning, Lieutenant Ekwum's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. Captain, 60+ vessels retaining functional weapons, concentrating fire on our position. Cortez did not look concerned. Confirmed. They didn't understand the warning the first time. Let's make sure they understand it this time. Orders, Captain. Cortez glanced toward Ambassador Whitmore, who gave a small, grim nod. Same targeting profile, Cortez said. Weapons and engines only on every vessel that just fired on us. No exceptions this time. Full disable, immediate. And Lieutenant, target Threen's flagship specifically. Communications array only. I want the High Speaker to hear exactly how his general reacts to this. The second engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Every one of the 60+ vessels that had fired on the persistent reckoning went dark within moments, their weapons and engines disabled with the same eerie, surgical precision as before. No further casualties beyond a handful of secondary system failures. On the absolute word's bridge, silence fell, heavy and absolute. Vashe stared at his display, watching the last flickers of his fleet's offensive capability wink out, one ship at a time, until nothing remained but 212 crippled, humiliated vessels drifting in formation, fully crewed, fully alive, and utterly unable to continue the fight. High Speaker Yeshul said quietly into the silence, "Incoming transmission, human vessel." Vashe didn't answer immediately. When he finally nodded, his voice came out smaller than he intended. "Put it through." Ambassador Whitmore's face appeared on the main display once more, calm as it had been from the very beginning, though something in her eyes now carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "High Speaker Vashe," she said, "I want to be clear about what just happened because I think it matters that you understand it correctly." Vashe said nothing. "We could have destroyed your fleet," Whitmore continued completely in the first 90 seconds before you ever had the chance to fire a second volley. "We chose not to. Not because we couldn't, because that was never the point." "Then what was the point, Ambassador?" Vashe asked, his voice hollow. "To show you the difference," Whitmore said, "between a species that negotiates because it's weak and a species that negotiates because it understands the actual cost of not negotiating. You called humanity predictable, 300 years of records built around the idea that we would always look for words before violence. You were right, High Speaker. We do. But you mistook the reason why." She let that settle for a moment before continuing. "We don't avoid war because we're afraid of it." She said quietly, "We avoid it because we understand better than most exactly what it costs, and we've built the tools to make certain that, when it happens anyway, It costs as little as possible for everyone involved, including you. Vashe looked around his bridge, at Threen, silent and stunned, at Commander Yeshull watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, at the wreckage of a doctrine 300 years unbroken, now lying in pieces around a single human ship that had never once needed to raise its full strength to prove its point. "What do you want, Ambassador?" he asked finally, all the earlier arrogance drained from his voice. Whitmore's expression softened just slightly. "The same thing we wanted this morning," she said, "to talk." 6 hours after the battle that was never meant to be a battle, the negotiation station at Vantral's Edge hosted a very different meeting than the one that had taken place there the day before. The circular chamber was the same. The wide table built for a dozen different physiologies was the same, but the atmosphere inside it had changed completely, and everyone present felt it. High Speaker Ordrun Vashe entered first this time, no longer flanked by officers eager to display Kesrath Suzerainty strength, but by a smaller, quieter delegation, Commander Yeshull among them, along with 2 senior advisors, and notably General Threen, whose earlier confidence had not survived the day's events intact. Ambassador Dana Whitmore arrived moments later, Captain Elena Cortez beside her, exactly as before. No additional guards, no visible change in posture. The only difference anyone in the room could name, if pressed, was that no one now doubted what that calm actually meant. Vashe took his seat slowly, and for a long moment no one spoke. "Ambassador," he said finally, his voice carrying none of its earlier certainty, "I find myself in an unfamiliar position. In 300 years, the Kesrath Suzerainty has never sat down to negotiate from a position of—" He paused, searching for the word. "Equal footing," Whitmore offered gently. "Weakness," Vashe said, more honestly than perhaps he intended. Whitmore shook her head. "That's not what happened today, High Speaker, and I'd ask you to consider that carefully before this conversation goes any further. If we wanted the Kesrath Suzerainty weakened, your fleet would not have 212 ships still fully crewed and repairable within days. We wanted the Kesrath Suzerainty informed. There's a significant difference, and everything about what happens next depends on you understanding it." Yeshull, seated beside Vashe, spoke up for the first time. "May I ask something, Ambassador?" Whitmore nodded. "The restraint you showed," Yeshull said, "the precision, the deliberate avoidance of casualties, even during the second engagement when General Threen ordered continued fire against your explicit warning. Was that truly the plan from the beginning, or did circumstances simply allow for it?" "It was the plan," Cortez answered before Whitmore could speak. "It's always the plan, Commander. Every simulation this ship has ever run, every scenario it was built for, starts from the same principle. Win without needing to destroy. It's harder. It's slower. It requires exactly the kind of precision you watched today. But it's the only kind of victory that actually leaves room for what comes after." "And what comes after, in your view?" Vashe asked, some of his old sharpness returning, though tempered now by something closer to genuine curiosity than arrogance. Whitmore folded her hands on the table in front of her. "This," she said simply, "a conversation between 2 powers who now understand each other's true capabilities, sitting down to determine whether conflict was ever actually necessary in the first place." The negotiation that followed lasted nearly 4 hours, longer than anyone on either side had expected, but it bore almost no resemblance to the ultimatum delivered the day before. Vashe, stripped of the certainty that had defined his career, found himself genuinely listening for perhaps the first time in decades. Whitmore, for her part, made no attempt to humiliate him further, no attempt to extract concessions beyond what was fair. She had seen, over 30 years in the diplomatic corps, how easily a defeated power's resentment could curdle into something far more dangerous than the original conflict, and she had no interest in planting those seeds today. "The Cathier Reach system," Vashe said eventually, "remains, by every legal precedent both our species recognize, a system Earth colonized first and holds legitimate claim to. I withdraw the suzerainty's demand for its transfer. Thank you, Whitmore said. However, Vashe continued, the resources within that system remain valuable to Kesrath Suzerainty's shipbuilding efforts, and I would be remiss not to at least explore whether some form of trade arrangement might serve both our interests now that the matter of he glanced briefly toward Cortez. Capability has been clarified. Whitmore allowed herself a small, genuine smile. That's a conversation I'd be glad to have, High Speaker. That's precisely the kind of conversation we came here hoping to have yesterday, before it became necessary to have a different one first. Commander Yeshill, watching the exchange, found herself thinking back to the strange, quiet ship she had walked through hours earlier, to the words Whitmore had spoken at the observation gallery. I would rather one person on that fleet understand why than have 212 ships find out the hard way together, all at once. She understood now, more fully than she had then, exactly what Whitmore had meant. By the end of the meeting, the framework of a genuine trade agreement had been established. Not the one-sided extraction the Kesrath Suzerainty had originally demanded, but something closer to an actual partnership. Resource sharing, weighted fairly, technological exchange in select non-military fields, and more importantly than any specific clause, a formal precedent. Any future disputes between Earth and the Kesrath Suzerainty would begin and end at a negotiating table, not a battlefield. As the meeting drew to a close, Vashe rose from his seat, studying Whitmore and Cortez for a long moment. I built my career on a doctrine that told me weaker species negotiate because they have no other choice, he said. I understand now that I misunderstood something fundamental. You did not negotiate today because you lacked strength, Ambassador. You negotiated because you chose to, even after you had already won. I am not certain the Kesrath Suzerainty has ever encountered that particular combination before. Most species don't, Whitmore said. Strength makes some people forget why they wanted peace in the first place. We try very hard not to be one of them. News of the engagement at Vantral's edge spread across the sector within days, and then across the wider galaxy within weeks, carried by traders, diplomats, and the independent monitoring stations, whose logs had captured every moment of the exchange in exact, unedited detail. The story that emerged was not the one anyone had expected. It was not a story of humanity's destruction, as most of the galaxy had quietly assumed would happen when the Kesrath Suzerainty issued its ultimatum. Nor was it simply a story of humanity's victory, though it was certainly that as well. It became, instead, a story about restraint, about a species that had built one of the most fearsome vessels ever fielded in that region of the galaxy, and had chosen, when finally forced to use it, to demonstrate not how much destruction it could cause, but how little destruction it actually required to make its point. For some species watching from a distance, the lesson was unsettling. A power capable of that level of precision was arguably more frightening than one that simply overwhelmed its enemies through brute force. Anyone could destroy. Very few could choose not to while still winning completely. For others, the lesson offered something closer to hope, proof that overwhelming strength did not have to mean overwhelming cruelty. Aboard the Kesrath Suzerainty homeworld, in a report filed personally by Commander Yeshill to the highest levels of Kesrath Suzerainty Command, one line in particular would be quoted for years afterward by analysts across a dozen different species, each interpreting it slightly differently depending on their own history with the humans of Earth. We tested them once, expecting the outcome that had defined our doctrine for 300 years. We received instead a lesson in what true strength actually looks like when it does not need to prove itself twice. I would recommend, with the full weight of my professional judgment, that the Kesrath Suzerainty never test them again. Weeks later, aboard the persistent Reckoning, now cruising quietly through the outer edges of human territory on its way back toward Earth, Captain Cortez stood once more in the small briefing room where the mission had first been planned, reviewing final reports with Ambassador Whitmore. The trade framework with the Kesrath Suzerainty is holding, Whitmore said, scrolling through a data pad. Better than I expected, honestly. Vashe has been surprisingly cooperative in the follow-up talks. I think today genuinely changed something for him. It should have, Cortez said. It's not every day someone's entire worldview gets rewritten in 90 seconds. Whitmore looked up from her pad, studying her captain for a moment. Do you think this changes anything long-term for Earth? I mean, word of what this ship can do is going to spread. Other powers are going to hear about it eventually. Cortez considered the question carefully before answering. I think it changes exactly one thing, she said. It tells anyone paying attention that humanity isn't negotiating from weakness. We never were. Not really. We just hadn't needed to prove it before. Now that we have, hopefully it means fewer situations like Cathier Reach in the future. Fewer ultimatums built on the assumption that we'll simply fold. And if someone doesn't believe it, if someone tests us again expecting a different outcome, Cortez glanced toward the viewport, toward the quiet stretch of stars beyond, toward Earth, waiting somewhere far ahead on their current course. Then we'll show them the same thing we showed the Kesrath Suzerainty, she said simply. Not because we want to, because it's the only way some lessons ever really get learned. Whitmore nodded slowly, setting down her data pad, allowing herself, for the first time since the mission began, a genuine moment of quiet relief. For what it's worth, Captain, she said, I don't think I could have asked for a better first test of this ship or this doctrine. You gave them every chance to walk away peacefully. That matters. It'll matter even more the next time someone hears this story before they decide to test us themselves. Cortez offered a small, tired smile, the first real smile she'd allowed herself since the mission had begun. That's the idea, she said. Hopefully, one day, nobody has to test us at all. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched on, quiet and endless, carrying the story of Vantral's edge outward across the galaxy, system by system, species by species. A story that would be repeated for years to come, each time carrying the same simple, unmistakable warning beneath it. They thought humanity would negotiate. They forgot to ask why.